Again, we also hope you RSVP as early as possible next time.
We need to clarify this date.
Can I get a cookie?
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about just a kind of suggested calendar to be keeping in mind. Okay, so we're gonna go down one. Okay. Okay, so, we know people are at different places at the start of this. Some of you might have had different material problems. Some of you don't have reliable copy machines because while the material's online or available in other ways, again, different people might have different things available. So, where you are at present is all over the place. Some of you are about to start this material tomorrow. And who thinks they might be the farthest along? Have we heard? Who's up to? Okay, where are you? What do you think you're at? 2 point something? 3 point?
2.3.
2.3? Can anyone beat that? Where are you?
I'm about to begin 5.
Oh, okay.
I'm about to begin section 3, lesson 5.
Section 3, lesson 5, or
The one that I'm-
3.5 or
3.53. 3.53. Right? That's further ahead than he is.
It is.
I'm just trying to get some ideas of where people are. Okay, so some of you might be up to 3.53, some of you are starting tomorrow. But here's what you might want to be keeping in mind as you go through this. When are your kids going to take the compass test? Are they not taking it until June? Or are they actually, most of them probably have a window either in January or some of you in February, where the idea is that they might take it a first time. Not that we squished everything into semester 1, but that's a reality there. Okay? So, what we've done with this calendar is we've said, okay, what's a reasonable pacing given certain kinds of issues that have emerged, again, like materials, and it feels like we've had a lot of holidays so far, right? So, what we're kind of suggesting here is a picture that might take them through the 3rd week of January. So if you look at your calendar, okay, the idea is that the last 2 weeks of January might look something like that. Okay, so our idea was chunk 3 in the algebra, which we haven't gone through. We'll start going through that a little bit more in November. Okay, that material, we'd say, one option for you to think about is aiming to get through 3.6 by the end of your semester. Okay, so you might be editing and adjusting something like this and rethinking some things here to make it what kind of fits you. Again, we're not writing on this, you should be on this section on this day. Okay, you might be making some different choices. But on the other hand, with what we know about the curricula, we're saying, you know what, chunk 3 is a lot of different kinds of work with equations. Again, we try to take some roads into it that are a little different and a little more unique than what kids have always been doing, because again, these are the kids that have struggled, right? Just so you know, the end of 3 keeps going with equations, but again, there's just some options about that. Could also be just a good way to start 2nd semester with them. Okay, and that is 3.8 through 3.9. I'm just saying spring algebra, let it start with something like that. Okay, so so this is what has kind of been molded into this calendar. Okay, now we're also putting in here 8 days where we've just written compass prep. Again, you could be moving those around however, but kind of suggest that this might be something that you are more formally keeping in mind. Okay, you know, I want to spend every other Thursday doing Compass Prep. Might be how you do it, just so that we're saying, you know what, we're saying in November we're really just putting 2 of them, in December we're putting 3 of them, and in January we're putting 3 of them, right? On the other hand, the whole curricula does some things connected to Compass Prep, so it's not some fuzzy overlap here. Yeah.
Are you guys going to be on your end as far as collecting or putting together something that would be good for Compass Prep other than links to places?
We're going to kind of go into that a little bit in a few minutes, actually, right? Okay, but and then we can kind of come back to that question and see how we improve from where we are, right? Okay, so non-routine problems, right? And this is again a strategy of how our kids used to tackling a problem that they haven't just been taught how to do. And is that actually a really important connection to some test-taking strategy? If you see a problem and you didn't just get prepped or reviewed for it yesterday, what can you do? What can you pull out of that equation? How are we helping students with that? So our non-routine problems, we hope, are also kind of working towards that. We're going to do another one of those today. Okay? Okay, so that was just a little blurb. Any other comments about pacing? Again, people are in different places. You might have to adjust this. We made some comments about section 5 of proportional reasoning. Some of you are already there, and you might say, you know what, I think I can move along with that. Some of you might say, you know what, it's going to work well for me to go ahead and leave that out. Okay, section 5, the trig and geometry, yeah.
Okay, on the pacing, you have PR day 1, 11, 12, but in the lesson plans, it doesn't follow it that way.
No, it doesn't. We're not saying to you, do this on this day, this on this day, this on, because for a lot of you, what we're saying is, we're kind of saying, you know what, about 28 days on proportional reasoning could be what fits you. The actual materials with section 5 are about 35 days worth of material. We're not ordering you to that degree. So you might be used to a pacing guide that kind of is giving you for every day be here. And again, so somebody who's starting this material on tomorrow, we have a couple. We have at least 3 people. Were there more than that? 4, 3? We have a few people starting tomorrow. Here's something I would say. I would say make sure that you save at least 5 or 6 days for section 4, which is the one that goes more formally into proportional equations, and let the rest of your earlier time be on sections 1 through 3, building up, understanding those proportions, using tables as a tool, okay, thinking about rate. You know, that would be a suggestion. You might plan backwards from where you are and kind of say, okay, if I want to kind of get back on gear, then I'm going to say that, let's see, PR was here ending on kind of with an assessment on the 6th. So I might say, okay, by Wednesday, October 28th, I want to be starting section 4, okay, of proportional reasoning. Between now and then, I should just work through the other materials and see, you know, extract some of the best stuff I can do. It does start out in a way that one piece depends on the piece that just came before it. Okay? Okay. Okay, let's shift on. Andrew, take it away.
So there were some questions about test prep. I think Patrick just asked about it. So we are going to spend a little bit of time today talking specifically about some of the things we want to prepare our students for. So you may, and I suggest being as clear as possible with your students about what this Compass test is, right? Because it's probably not like many of the other tests they've taken. Any student that goes into a CUNY college is going to have to take this Compass exam. It doesn't matter what their Regents scores were, it doesn't matter what their SAT scores were, they're taking it if they end up going to a CUNY school. And depending on how they do, that's where they will be placed for their math class. However, there's no time limit for this exam, which is something that I think many of us haven't seen before, right? There's usually some sort of time limit. If it's, you know, the end of your class period or an hour-long exam, this exam is not at all like that. There is no time limit at all. So I think you want to make sure that your students are really aware that they can spend as much time as they want on each problem and working through it, and not have to worry about, oh, well, you know, the clock is ticking on me, I've got to work through these different problems. So I think it's really important to talk about that aspect of it. It's an adaptive, the test is adaptive. And so for those of you who are not familiar with this style, depending on how you do on question 1, you get question 1 right, it will produce a question 2 that is different than if you got question 1 wrong. And so if a student continues to get questions wrong, the questions will actually start to get easier to determine where they're going to be placed. The questions that they're getting are mostly right, they will get harder and determine where they can get placed, although higher. Does that make sense? Yeah?
And maybe, Andrew, a little bit about the consequence, or the consequence of, or the value of early questions, spending more time.
Right, so since these early questions are going to be kind of middle-of-the-road questions, you want to make sure that they do spend time on these early questions, so that way, oh, maybe they don't spend so much time on question 1 or 2, and so then they skip it, and then the questions get easier, but it's already too late. They've lost out on getting up to some of that higher material because of that adaptive style, right?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, I understand why the questions would get harder, but what is the purpose of the questions getting easier?
So, because they're kind of middle-of-the-road questions, if it was just they didn't know anything at all, there are different levels of remediation that they can be placed in.
Right.
So maybe the students, if somebody doesn't know how to subtract integers, they're probably not going to get the fractions problems right either. But you might not know exactly where to place them at what level.
Okay.
And I think it's kind of understood that it's starting them off more at the algebra level, and then it shifts. If they're doing badly at that, it shifts into what would get considered or labeled as pre-algebra.
And then at the college level, when they are being programmed, does that mean that they're looking at possibly more than one remedial class?
Yeah.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah. The lowest, they might have to go through
Several.
3 math remedial classes before even smelling
In college.
a math class that would fulfill their major or their requirements.
Thank you.
Yes, Liz.
I have an example of
Sure.
we had a student who, first they start you off in algebra, and they send you down to pre-algebra. We had a student with not severe, but pretty bad test anxiety, but he warmed up after he was in the middle of the test. So he failed the algebra, but he almost aced the pre-algebra. And how the test is programmed, there was no way he could get back into the algebra to get out of the second remedial class. So because of his anxiety, he wasn't able to get out of remedials.
So again, so the note for
Yeah.
him is, look, take your time on this.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
I had a nephew that just sat for the Compass exam. He placed out of pre-algebra, but was 4 points shy of placing out of algebra. So the remedial class that he has to take right now at BMCC is Math 12. So he's basically going to retest out of the algebra level instead of retesting out of the pre-algebra level. But I've had students that needed to go as low down as the pre-algebra level to move their way all the way back up because they couldn't even test out of the pre-algebra level.
Yeah.
I've been teaching in CUNY for quite a while. In the case where a student doesn't do too bad on those tests, they give you what is called, they give you a class for like 2 weeks to prepare you to retake the exam. But it's not for everybody. It's only for a small minority who score close to what they want you to score to test out.
Different CUNY schools do have some different programs. I know that the MCC has something called summer immersion,
Yes.
where they can take a 2 or 3 week course that will ideally prepare them, and they'll get another shot at that exam. But you can only take that course if you're in a specific range that first time you take the exam. So there are different things at different CUNY schools that hopefully will provide for some of these students, but our goal is to kind of give them that shot so they don't even need that second shot.
Sorry, what's the window of time between taking, if you took one and then you wanted to take it again, what's the window of time that they are not allowed to
I
take
don't
it
know.
again?
I think it's, so they get 2 shots. A lot of the students get 2 shots in senior year. They'll take it in January, February, and then again May-ish. Now, if they apply to and go to a school that has one of these additional programs, that program will dictate when they will take that exam. But just on their own, they can't just say, okay, I want to try to take the test again in August. They would have to be enrolled in one of these other special programs.
The exam is retaken at the end of the program. Right at the end, it dictates where they go next.
Right. Yeah, Patrick.
If it's a DAC, but I don't understand her situation, why, or the example she gave. If the guy is doing continuously well in pre-algebra, why doesn't he move back into algebra?
This is the exam, right?
Yeah.
As well taken test.
It's how the
It
exam is
doesn't let you.
designed. I mean, this is something that, you know, none of us here designed this. This is like, our hands are tied for this. And it's actually not even going to be true that much longer. We're going to be switching from the compass to something else.
It is through to 2017.
2017,
Yeah,
we have another
so
year or so of
still-
this. But all of your
yeah.
students right now will be going through this process. Liz?
Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know, but there's 4 tests. And there's pre-algebra, algebra, trig, and geometry, we don't care about these. But they start you out with algebra. Once you fill out of the algebra test, the computer decides that there's no way I can take algebra. So they throw you back into pre-algebra, and algebra's
Well, how many
finished.
problems
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
to determine that?
I don't know.
I
It's once
don't know
you
the
fill out
specific
your-
numbers for those sorts of things. Again, because it's kind of this adaptive test.
But I guess here's the.
My
yeah.
question is, if number 1 is an algebra question,
Is
does
it what?
get-
It's an algebra.
if number one's an algebra question, if you get it wrong, does it go to another algebra question, or does it go
Yes,
straight to
yes,
pre-algebra?
yes.
It's not
So
just
how many of
one
those-
question.
Does it go to
Between
before
4
it
and
gets
6.
out?
Somewhere between 4 and 6.
Okay,
So
thank
if-
you.
if-
Did you hear that? He
Yeah.
said about 4, he said
Somewhere between
4 to 6. It might be about 4 to 6 problems. If they're getting all of those wrong, that's it.
yeah.
They've kind of lost their chance at that.
So let's say, if they start with the algebra strand and they do well on the algebra strand, do they ever do the pre-algebra strand? Or-
No.
No.
So it's assumed that they know the pre-algebra
Yeah.
if they complete the algebra.
Right.
That's the
Right here.
strategy for
Yeah.
preparation.
So,
I just
so,
have a question.
yes,
What's the website that we could go to look to see samples of the?
we're gonna get to that. We're
Yeah.
gonna get to that. I have many more slides.
Uh,
It is all multiple choice as well, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yes. So maybe, and again, as we're talking about these different things, we want to make sure, as Liz brought up, you know, you want to prepare your students not just for the mathematics, but to try to prepare them just for those test-taking skills that we're talking about. And so some of the things, you know, maybe just some of the basics that you take for granted that students in your class might not even cross their mind, you might want to be explicit with them. Depending on how they get there, some schools are going to be busing students over in January, February, but you do want to make sure that, you know, they're there on time, that they have their materials, and that they know how to use their materials. So they are allowed calculators for this exam.
Not
Wait,
allowed graphic calculators.
from the computer.
From the computer, from the computer. So you may want to spend some time working on how does the computer calculator differ from the calculator on their phone that they're probably used to using. And so spending some time just going through the process of that computer calculator and what does it mean and how is it different from the one that they're used to using every day. I know that personally, from my test taking, if I was studying a lot of different material, I found that the very first thing I wanted to do on the exam was write down that one thing that I couldn't remember really well. Because I knew I could keep it in my mind, and then if the test started, it was too late, it was gone. But if the very first thing I did when I sat down was I wrote down, that one thing that I wanted to remember, then it's there, I can always come back to it. So you probably all have your own kind of test-taking skills that you may want to impart onto your students. And I suggest spending some time with them, going through and making sure that they're best prepared to take a test, as well as for the math. And again, it's not timed, so it is a little bit different than what you're used to.
Okay, so that worked for a paper exam.
Yeah.
This is an electronic exam, so are
Well,
they
they should
allowed?
be given scrap
They
paper.
have scrap.
They're allowed
They
to
should be
read-
given scratch
okay.
paper.
Yes.
Thank you.
So again, just some kind of specific things to think about with multiple choice tests. It's sometimes helpful, once you read the question, to read all of the answers. There may be something there that they can immediately eliminate a bad answer, or maybe it gives a hint at what the correct answer is. If they look at all the answers and they see that, oh, this question is with fractions, and then all of my answers are actually whole numbers, well, that's a pretty big hint that somewhere these fractions are going to disappear and I'm going to be dealing with whole numbers. So there are different things that you can pick up in these multiple choice tests. And sometimes a guess is certainly better than nothing. And to try to be educated in that guess, I always tell my students to pick the one that's different. They might not know why it's different, but pick the one that's different. And again, there are lots of different things that maybe you as teachers, as educators, have different tips and tools that are not necessarily specific to math, but use those and share those different tools with your students.
Andrew, do you want to ask, do people want to share some kind of what is a test-taking strategy that you might share with your students on this?
Yeah, I don't have a well, I do, and I'm not ready to share, but can they go back to questions on this test?
No.
So they have to make
Yeah.
a decision, so that's a test-taking strategy they don't have access to.
Right,
Do
right.
the ones you know and go back later because it's not time, but.
It's tough, right? Because we want
Yeah.
to tell them that for some tests,
Yes,
and then
well, it's for most tests.
yeah, right.
Is there the kind of thing where you get penalized for guessing wrong, or you get points for just the right ones? There, some tests do that kind of thing.
I think the penalty for wrong is the same as the penalty for blank,
So, okay.
right?
I would think that because the student, after so many questions, cannot go back and try to test into algebra, I would think that that is the penalty. So if I leave a question blank and I move on and I know I can't go back to it, me leaving that question blank is kind of the same thing as me leaving or answering that question as wrong. And if that was a question that can test me into algebra, my consequence is I've lost a question that can keep me at the level to get me out of remediation. So it's better to answer something than to leave it blank.
You have a 1 in 4 or a 1 in 5 chance, right? Which might be better than a 0 in 5 chance, right?
So I've handed out 2 sheets for you. The first one that's stapled has some of that compass information. So it talks about how it is an adaptive questioning test. It gives you some kind of general information about it. The second sheet I handed out is just a suggestion. One of the things you might want to prepare your students for is to kind of organize their thought processes. And so this is something that I've used in some of my classrooms. It's just essentially a plain piece of paper with split up into quadrants. And then what they can do is select which particular set that they're dealing with. If they're dealing with whole numbers, and they've always struggled with whole numbers, and what do I do when I add, and what do I do when I divide, and what do I do when I subtract, it can help to organize their thoughts a little bit. So to perhaps spend some time on organizing these thought processes. Sometimes when we're just there, we're teaching, we're throwing so much at them, they don't have a whole lot of time to kind of sit down and prepare and to organize. And so I have found personally that this does help some students. So this is something that I have used in test prep. Does anybody else have something that they have used or would like to share? Yeah, Allison.
I have a question, actually.
Sure.
I don't know, I think the last one of you must guess commands as most unique. I don't know, I always thought it was like not like that.
I mean, sometimes, yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes there's one that's totally out there and you can eliminate that one. But sometimes, you know, sometimes the longest question is the correct one.
I feel like I would think they, you know, maybe they would try to trick you, so like we put the decimal place in a different position.
Yeah, I mean,
Hey, Andrew,
there's lots of different ways to think about it.
But that comment about is it most unique, like that could be something that kind of you could check with the CUNY questions that they put out there, right? Because I think, what are you saying that often there might be at least two answers? Like, do they even predict an error that kids will make and put that in there? They might, yeah. So it's.
Again, it's one strategy, and it's not something that's going to work for all of the different questions. I mean, I think that actually the earlier one, you know, look at the questions first, and that might provide hints. If I see, you know, 32, 33, 34, and then 90, you know, well, my answer is probably in the 30s, so that they kind of work against each other. Then again, on the other hand, sometimes that one unique one is unique for a reason. It is correct.
I had a question about the timing. So you said it's not a time test, but it's a question timeout. Like if I wanted to stop and stare at this question for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, can I do that, or will I get a blank screensaver?
It should remain there. I mean,
Yeah.
So then maybe a strategy would be for them to take a break, you know, even after a certain amount of questions.
right. You know, if you sense yourself, you know, tensing up and you know, yeah, you know, take a minute, you know, absolutely.
So they could literally sit there for 8 hours taking this test? If they wanted.
They wanted to.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think many have, but yeah.
Right,
But I
right.
did have a student that was told, you know, gotta leave already.
Really.
After how many hours though?
Probably 5 hours.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that the message we want to communicate to our kids, so 5 hours, and this is actually a test that some people could do in 20 minutes. So, you know, those little occurrences might be true, but what we need our kids to feel is, look, don't feel rushed on this test. And it's weird because testing their whole life has had these timing constraints, and all of a sudden, now it's different on this one, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Katrina.
Usually what I tell my students is that if you're rushing through the questions and if the test ends too soon, like within a half an hour, you probably didn't pass, okay? So I've had students that the test usually starts at 10 o'clock, 10:30 they're out, and then another group of students, 4 o'clock, they're still there. Now they're on the trig section. So they have a sense of understanding as to how they did well on the test day. When they just locked out of the test after about 30, 45 minutes, they know that, you know what, I'm gonna have to come back here and do this all over again. So the longer that they're there, assuming that they're taking, you know, appropriate times to answer each question, the better they're actually doing.
So they're taking these tests at the school that has admitted them, or do you have like testing centers?
There are testing centers. The testing centers are at some of the CUNY locations, like what are some? Lehman and
Yeah.
BFC
So your high
and
school
Gutman,
is
I think, yeah.
probably in the
Your high
process of
schools,
arranging.
right.
Okay, we need to talk, because I'm probably the one that's arranging it.
Okay.
So this is something for all of you to try to get answered by your administration, and it might be the council, I don't know exactly who's answering it for you. But between your administration, a decision will be made about those dates. So, you can say, look, I kind of need to plan out my pace. Can we learn what that date is going to be, right? Push that a little bit.
So I'm going to ask you to take some time, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and work on this question. And I want you to try to take note of how you're going through this problem. So look for that right answer, but also how are we getting to that right answer?